Our next speaker, Mr. Chuck Wade, grew up in Corona, New Mexico, not far from the site of the famous UFO crash at the Roswell incident. He served a hitch in the Navy Seabees and earned a civil engineering degree from the New Mexico State University, where he met his wife, Nancy. During his career in building construction, he worked all over the United States, opening up Wade Building Company in Gallup, New Mexico. Now retired from business and his two children grown, Chuck has more time to pursue his hobby of UFO research. He has combined information on artifacts gathered in his home and across the state of New Mexico in today's presentation on debris from two crashed UFOs in New Mexico in 1947. Please help me welcome Mr. Chuck Wade.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. I'd like to give you this in just a moment. Good evening. And my name is Chuck Wade, and I was born and raised in Corona, New Mexico. And I'm fixing to tell y'all stories about the conversations my family has had with the people that have handled the debris from the crash near my hometown of Corona. And I have an affidavit in my hand that I signed May the 27th, 1977. I had it notarized and sent it to the UFO Museum in Roswell. My wife and I went there to the 50th anniversary, and lo and behold, they had this thing on the wall. And we were also there in Roswell about a month ago, and it's still there. And I am very proud of what we've done. And this is the first time I've ever spoke in public like this, so bear with me. What I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the history of the Wade family. Like whenever my father was born in Arlington, Texas, February the 2nd, 1902. That was always easy to remember, 20202. New Mexico became a state on January the 6th, 1912. The spring of 1912, my grandparents loaded my dad, their belongings, into a covered wagon, hitched up a team of horses, and came to New Mexico as homesteaders. They settled about 20 miles east of Corona, and that's where Dad grew up. The Depression came along in 1929, and Dad started a one-man hard rock gold mine in Lincoln County, New Mexico, and that's also the same county Corona is in. Dad's whole mining operation consisted of a pick, a shovel, a sledgehammer, some drill steel, and dynamite, and a gold pan. And that's how Dad survived the Depression. In 1935, Dad was going through the little town of Corona. He stopped in at the bar, and before the night was over with, he owned that bar. And for the next 42 years, he and my mother, Alla D. Wade, owned and operated the Wade Bar there in Corona. And it was in the front of this bar in the summer of 1947. Dad was standing there at the bar, at the front of the bar, and a Mr. Mac Brazel drove up in his old pickup truck, and Mac was quite excited because something had happened out there on his ranch. He was the foreman of the Foster Ranch. Something had crashed out there on that ranch, and he had no idea what it was. It was stuff he had never seen before, and he really wanted my father to go out and see what was out there. Unfortunately, Dad won out by not going. And I've heard my dad mention that a number of times. He really wished he had gone. But Dad did suggest that he go to Roswell and report this to the authorities in Roswell. I've also heard twice in the last 3 years, Geraldine Perkins, who owned the the drugstore there in Corona. Geraldine told me that Mac Brazel came up to their drugstore, called Roswell, and reported the crash. And apparently he went to Roswell. And whenever he got there, he told the sheriff about the crash. The sheriff got hold of the base, and Mr. Jesse Marcel and another person went with Mac out to the debris field. They loaded up a couple vehicles worth of materials and then came back. And Jesse Marcel stopped at his house and showed his son and wife some of this material. I have been in the audience whenever Jesse Marcel told this story about what this material looked like and also what some of the writings were. And it certainly wasn't like the writings that was on that today. I've seen what Mr. Marcel said. Well, Jesse Marcel must have got hold of the base commander, Colonel Blanchard, and told him what was happening. And then Colonel Blanchard told the PA officer, Mr. Hout, yeah, thank you, Lieutenant Hout, about writing an article for the paper. And that was the article that went around the world. And at this time, I'd like to recognize Julie. Is Julie here? Boy, I can't see. There's Julie. Julie is the daughter of Mr. Hout. And Julie runs the UFO Museum there in Roswell. And I encourage people to go there and see the museum. They've done a really bang-up good job. And as we all know, the next day, the general had put the fix in on this whole thing by saying there's nothing to it, it was just a balloon. And I call that baloney. Along about 1978, Mr. Stanton Friedman found or discovered Mr. Jesse Marcel, and they had a discussion about the crash there by Corona. And in 1980, the book, The Roswell Incident, came out, and I read this book with enthusiasm because I had heard about this crash basically all my life, but I really didn't know much about it. So I read the article, the book itself, and there is a picture of Mr. Bill Brazel, and there is a caption under this picture. Boy. And under this caption, I'm going to paraphrase, apparently Bill Brazel had found the parts to this crash out on the Foster Ranch because he had became the foreman after his dad left the ranch and moved to Tularosa. And Bill was in my dad's bar with these parts and pieces, and somebody blabbed to the government, and here came the government and confiscated it. And thanks to Stanton, we have this information. But I took it one step further. I've known Bill most of my life. I was also a very good friend of his brother Vernon. At the time, Bill Brazel lived in Capitan, and I called him up. We discussed, chit-chatted for a little while. He wanted to know how Mother was because my dad had passed away about 3 years prior to that. And then I read Bill this statement that's on the screen there, and I asked Bill, is this true? And he said yes. And I have been on a quest since that moment till I stand here before you today to find out what my father did not see out in the Foster Ranch. I know a lot, but I absolutely do not know it all. But someday we will. I really hope that's to be true. In June of 1997, on the 50th anniversary, Colonel Philip Corso's book came out the day after Roswell. I read that book before I went to Roswell, and I got to thinking that the governor of the state of New Mexico should have this book because it would affect us very well. My son had been on the governor's staff for the past 2.5 years, and I thought that it would be really nice for the governor to have a book. So I bought a second book there at the Roswell UFO Museum. Didn't take us long, my wife and I, very long to find Colonel Corso, and he graciously signed my book, and then I had him sign the governor's book. And we got to talking, and Colonel Corso told me that he had some information that he would like to have the governor had. So I became a courier for Colonel Corso to the governor of the state of New Mexico. In August, I received a package of information from the colonel. I copied all that information, took the copy to the governor, kept the original for myself. And one of the items that was in there I think is absolutely profound. And Colonel Corso also told me this in person. Let's go up. Yeah, that's it. He said that the Los Alamos National Labs had came out to the base where he was a commanding officer on the north end of White Sands Missile Range. They dug a hole about 30 feet deep, and they buried a generator that was about 6 foot cubed and weighed about 6 tons. He said that they fired it up, buried it, and the only thing that came out of that hole was the electricity that went to a box to run part of his base. Colonel Corso called that a reactor. And I would like to read the last paragraph. You can't really see that. That's the colonel's handwriting from the original. But down at the bottom of that box, it reads, "I write all this for the governor. It is only fitting, since Trinity site is in New Mexico, the crash of the UFO was in New Mexico, it all began in your state, and it is only logical that the new world began in New Mexico." What he was referring to, I'm quite sure, was the way to make electricity without having a fuel system. And that would be called a motionless electromagnetic generator or self-powering. I'll stay with Colonel Corso just a little bit, and I'll tell you more about that generator. Colonel Corso and I were to meet in Roswell on the next year, the 98, because he had more information for the governor. I talked to him shortly before I went to Roswell. I got to Roswell, and he had had a heart attack, which is, that's sad. And he wasn't there, obviously. I was really disappointed that he did not come. Sadly to say, Colonel Corso passed away on the 16th of July, 1998, just 13 months after his book came out. Also on the 16th of July, that was the day that Trinity happened. On the 16th of July, 1945, was whenever the first atomic bomb was detonated there at Trinity site. Also on a personal note, my youngest brother passed away as an infant, July the 16th, 1943. Now let's get back to that reactor, as Colonel Corso said. I'm going to take exception with the word reactor, because a reactor means something happens that causes heat. And this reactor, or whatever it was they put in the ground, I'm going to call it not a reactor. All it had was electricity coming out. There was no cooling system. Therefore, it wasn't a reactor. There was also no fuel system. Therefore, it had to be self-powering. I predict, and hopefully, that this was a motionless electromagnetic generator. And, I'm sorry. That was fine. The book, Bearden's book, Energy from the Vacuum, I think will become the Bible of the future of our energy supply. 2 years ago, I wrote a white paper called The Unnecessary Energy Crisis, How to Solve It Quickly. And Dr. Bearden has got the means and the ideas. What we need is the money to go. Okay, I'm going to get off of that now, and that's my little, there's other stories about people that has used felt the parts and pieces from Corona. I'd like now to take some time and transfer from Corona to the Plains of Saint Augustine. Per the map up there, Roswell's on the bottom right, which would be the southeast. Corona is basically in the center, and the debris field was just outside of town, about 25 miles. The Plains of Saint Augustine, you can see where Socorro is there, then the Plains is about 50 miles to the west, and this is a vast area of old lake beds. Last year at this conference, Mr. Art Campbell from the state of Oregon was a presenter, and he presented items that he had uncovered and found there on that dry lake bed. And you can read this in the proceedings of last year's conference. I won't go into the details, but some of them are quite profound, like microscopic wire, which is a human hair is huge versus this wire, etc. There's several things. In March of this year, Mr. Art Campbell was a presenter at the UFO Symposium, Aztec, New Mexico, and there after his talk, I met up with him and became friends, and we started talking about a dig over on the plains. So for the next several months, he and I planned to do this dig. And in June of this year, we went to the Plains of Saint Augustine and had a very, very successful dig. Is Tom Weatherby here? Tom, would you please stand? Tom is one of the people that was with us on this dig. I'm really super glad that you're here today, Tom. Thank you for coming. There were several of us there, including a work crew, and what I mean, we sifted some dirt. As you can see, that big triangular there, I'm a retired general contractor, and I like to build things big, and we built 4 of these things, these big A-frames, and they had big baskets in them there. We had easily changed the type of screens for depending on what we thought we was going to find or did find, etc. And we did find a number of things other than just metal, but I'm only going to talk about the metal today because, well, just because some of this, we don't know what it is, but we're going to find out, and we're also going to find out a lot more about this metal. I was very, very fortunate to be in contact with a professor at the New Mexico Institute of Mining and Technology in Socorro, New Mexico. This professor had worked for Alcoa Aluminum for a number of years, and now he's a professor there. And he became interested in this metal. So we got an agreement to use an electron microprobe to look at this metal. What he did, he took a 1-inch vial or a little, it looked like a pill bottle, and he put all 6 of these pieces of metal, little pieces of it that I had sent him, into this on its edge. And he had a method to hold them on the edge, and then he poured epoxy around these pieces of metal. And then he ground the bottom off where it was all really nice and flat. But you can see later on he didn't get it quite as flat as you thought it was. It looked like a mirror, but it turned out there was a few scratches. We'll see. But anyway, that's what we did. I said there were 6 pieces of metal. We made a bar graph of the thickness of these metals. And there's 5 pieces of metal there because these are foils. There were 4 different sizes, as you can see, and 2 of the pieces were the same, as best we could figure it out. We had some 30 micron. Wow, already? Time flies when we're having fun. But I can do it. We had one piece at 30 microns and a 65 microns, and y'all probably have not a clue of what a micron is. I didn't. A micron is 1/1,000,000th of a meter. And a meter is 39 inches, more or less. So a micron is very, very small. And now let's go through these metals. I have in my hand piece number 1, weighed 1, and it's about 7 inches by 4.5 inches, and it's doubled. This thing is like a taco shell. And whenever we found it, there were 3 pieces of foil inside of it. Now, unfortunately, there's only 1. But anyway, that's what number 1 looks like. The slide there is that same piece of metal, but they've got it, that's the end view of it. That's looking right down onto the top of that metal. And then we have weighed 2. And this is the 65 micron, which is actually quite thick versus the others. And this stuff is rather hard, and they have made it where there's a seam around it. They've actually worked on it. And number 3 is coming apart. Whenever we found it, it was all in one piece. Now it's in pretty bad shape. This slide here shows the end of piece number 3 and 2. It was in the same picture. They was almost together on the in the vial. And you can notice how big a 35 micron is versus a 20 micron. It looks much, much different. Yeah. And then number 4, that's just a picture of the 4, and it's 30 microns. What this is now is actually what we went there to see. This is a blow-up of the picture itself, of the end of it. And I would like to just talk to you about what this shows. The little white specks in there is iron. There's just iron. That top left up there is just a boulder of iron versus the size of this thing. And the black spots there are voids. And what causes a void is silicon, because silicon and aluminum do not want to be together. So if there's silicon in aluminum, it creates a hole with the silicon inside of it. And I want you to notice something very, very definite. Let's look at the edges of it. Along the side there's just no holes. There's no black spots along the 2 sides, either side of it there. There's just not any silicon there. But there is the holes, the black place out in it, okay? This is this is where they actually take and find a specific element, and then they can tell where the element is. Like on the right-hand side is all 3 of the elements: aluminum, iron, and silicon. The one on the left tells where the iron is. And then you can see on the left there, but the right-hand side of the left, those 2 little or big spots there. Look across on the bottom right to those white places. Do you see that? It's kind of difficult to explain. Pat, could you look at the iron down on the bottom? Iron on the bottom. Yeah, those 2 big pieces. See, these 2 pieces right here is those big old white spots there. This up here is the aluminum, and it's basically all aluminum, but then there's these big old holes here. And that's got silicon in it, because you can see here, this is strictly silicon. See those holes, or pieces of silicon that goes in these holes? That's why you don't want silica in your aluminum because it creates holes. Okay. Okay, next slide, please. This is a pie chart showing household aluminum. The one on the right there is 98.5% aluminum and just a little bit of other stuff. What they really want is 99.5% aluminum, because it's much easier to roll. The more stuff you put in there, the harder it is to roll. The one on the left, the pie chart on the left, shows aluminum, iron of 6%, and silica of 3%. And that's just a whole lot of stuff to put in aluminum to make a foil. Okay, we'll need to go, what we are now is on Wade 5, and this thing here is just delicate. It's 14 microns thick, or thin. The household foil, the standard is 17 microns, so it's even smaller than household foil by about 20-25%. And it is really delicate. And one thing I'd like for you to notice is, whenever you look at it, this stuff is totally wrinkled like you wouldn't believe. It's definitely not just wrinkled by itself. It's man-made, or whomever made it wrinkled. Okay. That's what it looks like in cross-section. And it's only, like I say, 14 microns. This is the number 6, and this thing here is 1/16 of an inch high. And why I didn't put it on the bar chart, because this thing is 1,476 microns, and it's a 1/16 of an inch. If we'd had it on the chart, it would probably be 50 feet in the air. Okay. This is probably the most telling picture I've got. See all that doggone iron just totally scattered throughout there like a snowstorm. But what is so neat is this piece of aluminum, okay, has a cladding on both sides, and that cladding is 77 microns. And please note that it's iron deficient, but it has an excess silicon. But looky where the silicone is. It's on the inside, close to that snowflake place, and there's no excess silicon on the outside. Therefore, this piece of metal absolutely, positively did not take on silicon from the soil that it was buried in. And that's an absolutely telling picture, and the professor and the technician were just, they had never seen anything like this. Okay. This picture gives a better idea about the cladding. We've got those arrows there where you can really see, and be aware that all those black holes is silicon. But it's on the inside, especially up on the top right-hand side. That's really dark, but it's on the inside, not the outside. Okay. This is a picture like we had of, okay, I've got 1 minute. The bottom on the right has all of the elements in it. Then the one on the left, you can see all that iron just scattered throughout it. It's just terrible, they say. And then up the top is aluminum with all those black holes. And then on the right, you can see the silicon. And you can look at it really, really close and see that those outside pieces don't have the iron, but it has a lot of silicon. But it did not come from the soil. I want to stress that. Okay, next one. Okay, no, this is fine. One thing that Mr. Campbell found was a cross. He had been there quite a while before they found this cross, so somebody knew where this site was, and they predict they made a homage to the people that were there, the little people, as Barney Barnett said. And with that, I bid you adieu. Thank you.